From abusing underage athletes for almost 20 years to getting stabbed by his fellow inmates, these are the shocking revelations of Larry Nassar's abuse. Nassar was a big deal in the gymnastics world for almost 2 decades, and as the team doctor for the United States women's national gymnastics team, he had the trust of all those young athletes and their families. The guy was worshipped as a doctor, and parents thought it was an honor for their little girls to be treated by him because of his street cred. Almost like they believed it'd be a one-way ticket to greatness. I mean, he even worked with Olympians. But the truth that eventually came out was something straight out of a horror movie, revealing Nassar's dark and sinister side. Nassar served as the team doctor for 18 years, which is a heck of a long time to be in such a powerful position. But here's where things get twisted, because he used that power and authority to prey on vulnerable children and young women, shamelessly assaulting them under the guise of medical treatment. Sickening. And let me tell you, the scale of his abuse was off the charts. The total number of Nassar's victims, including some of today's biggest female athletes like Simone Biles and Michaela Maroney, is more than the combined total of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby's alleged victims. And this creep didn't limit his sick actions to one place. He targeted girls during the 2012 Olympics in London, at the USA Gymnastics Training Center in Texas, and even at gymnastics meets in Rotterdam. The revelations were enough to send shivers down your spine, shaking the whole nation by this scandal. I mean, this was a guy supposed to help these young athletes, someone they should have been able to trust, but he used his position to hurt and exploit them instead. It's heartbreaking and infuriating all at once. And it just goes to show that you should never judge a book by its cover. Nassar's sick crimes started way back in 1998 and didn't stop until 2005. For all those years, he was out there committing awful acts of assault against so many innocent victims. And the most disturbing fact is that his very first victim was a 6-year-old. It was clear that this predator had been preying on people for ages, until justice finally caught up with him and he was finally caught. The real heroes of this story are the brave survivors who stood up and fought back against Nassar. During that week-long sentence hearing, they stepped forward to share their gut-wrenching stories, determined to make sure this guy paid for his despicable actions. Among those courageous souls were also gymnastics superstars like Biles, Aly Raisman, and Maroney. These amazing athletes weren't afraid to speak out, and their emotional testimonies, along with nearly 300 other victims, painted a vivid picture of Nassar's vile deeds on their lives. It's gut-wrenching to think that these girls, who found confidence in sports, were turned into self-loathing teenagers and adults because of this monster. Even his wife divorced him back in July of 2017 on suspicion of crimes, taking custody of their 3 children. It's hard to wrap your head around the horror these survivors endured, but their bravery and strength are nothing short of awe-inspiring. Though it still begs the question, how'd this jerk get away with it for so long? How on earth could USA Gymnastics let hundreds of young girls undergo, quote, treatment from this creep, especially since they were carried out in their hotel or dorm beds all alone? It's almost like they were supporting his behavior. But if you thought that was bad, then get ready, because it gets so much worse. Turns out that complaints about the guy were just brushed off by the commission, which the Olympic gold medalist Raisman explained in court. Now, you might think that this whole thing seems absolutely crazy, right? But those in the know about gymnastics get it all too well. Joan Ryan, author of the book Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, knows the dark side of the sport all too well. According to her, gymnasts are trained from a young age to deny their own feelings and experiences. They're programmed to doubt themselves, and that's exactly why this disgusting abuse could happen to so many of these young athletes. Jennifer Say, a former national gymnastics champ and team member, also saw this problem way back in the 80s. She knew about coaches who would emotionally and abuse their athletes, with one of her teammates even confessing about being abused for years. But as you might have already guessed, the gymnastics community ignored it because everyone was afraid of being blacklisted from the sport. And guess what? Those fears turned out to be true. Just like we've seen in the Nassar case, this trial also shined light on some serious issues in the world of sports. This mentality that values performance over protection has been running wild for way too long, especially in the gymnastics world. Which is why it's no wonder that the Nassar case didn't get as much media attention until its final week. because people just assumed that this was how gymnastics operated, and that is the real problem. Ryan also talked about the brutal regime at the Karolyi Ranch, where Nassar did most of his dirty deeds. Athletes were treated like they were in a desert there, being starved and thirsty almost every single day, having to resort to begging their male teammates to smuggle them food. Though the ranch was designated an official Olympic training site by the Olympic Committee, they never implemented or enforced its safe sport policies there, allowing their practices to run free. This was abuse in its purest form, no matter what way you look at it. But as long as the Karolyis were bringing in medals, the media ate it up. Even when gymnast Jamie Dancher spoke out about them in 2000, US columnists decided to mock her instead, saying her finger-pointing trill was worse than her fourth-place finish. With everything that came out of the Nassar trial, you'd think it'd convince officials to make some real changes, right? Wrong. Aside from some bigwigs from Michigan State University and USA Gymnastics resigning, mostly due to public pressure, not a single soul from the US Olympic Committee bothered to show up at the trial. This made people question if these officials are really serious about the whole thing. Thankfully, though, Nassar couldn't crawl away and hide in his committee-sponsored hole this time. The sentencing hearing in January of 2018 was the moment everyone was waiting for. It was a real turning point in the case, because Nassar had no choice but to plead guilty to 7 charges of criminal abuse, later adding 3 more guilty pleas as part of a plea agreement. Now granted, this was a lot less than the 300+ allegations placed against the guy, but it was something at least. Thankfully, the judge presiding over this drama was none other than Rosemarie Aquilina, and boy did she bring the heat. She wasn't playing around, and it came as no surprise that she gave the guy a 40 to 175-year sentence on assault charges. But that's not all she had to say. Because as she handed down that massive sentence, she looked at Nassar straight in the eye and dropped the mic with the ultimate line: "I just signed your death warrant." Despite the fact that some nerds at the appeal court whined about her comment being inappropriate, the court vetoed their complaints, basically telling them to stick it. Even later on, during the 2018 ESPY Awards, Aquilina was given a standing ovation and honored for her efforts in the case. But the story didn't end there either. It's common knowledge that child molesters and pedos don't last in prison, and Nassar, guys, was no exception. He was attacked not once, but twice after his incarceration, the latest of which took place on the 9th of July, 2023. Turns out that while he was watching the 2023 Wimbledon Championship in the prison's TV room, he turned to one of his fellow inmates and made a lewd remark about one of the underage athletes. And since his status as a offender was known to everyone in prison, he was attacked and stabbed multiple times with a makeshift knife. Luckily, Nassar survived the attack and is currently in stable condition, which is good news because the guy deserves to rot in prison, not go out the easy way. For now, he's been placed under 24/7 supervision until he recovers, after which he'll likely get transferred to another prison, where his life isn't going to be any easier. So, there you have it. From getting stabbed by his fellow inmates to abusing underage athletes for almost 20 years, those were the shocking revelations of Larry Nassar's abuse.